They beat my mom. She's not moving. Please, you have to come now. 9-year-old Lois Nicole sprinted across the marble floors of Nicole Enterprises, her voice slicing through the lobby like a siren. Her white sneakers squeaked with every step, her knees scraped, her dress torn. Behind her, the front desk receptionist rose to her feet, phone halfway to her ear. Security began to stir. Executives froze mid-conversation. But Lois didn't stop for any of them. She ran straight toward the tall man in the charcoal gray suit standing near the corner. The one wearing a fedora indoors. The one no one dared to approach. Italo Milano. "Mr. Milano, please," she cried, skidding to a stop beside him. She grabbed his sleeve with both hands, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. They hurt her. She won't wake up. For a long second, he didn't move, his expression unreadable. Then his eyes shifted, ice turning to steel. He straightened his cuff, then looked down at the girl. "Take me to her." Italo Milano had been part of this company longer than half the people who worked there. But no one ever spoke to him. He didn't take meetings. He didn't make announcements. He didn't sit on panels or pose for press releases. He simply watched. Everyone knew his name, but not where it came from. They whispered it in break rooms and around elevators. Some said he was a silent investor. Others claimed he was connected to someone powerful. But no one ever asked. Because when you've spent decades surviving by being feared, silence is enough. Lois tugged at his hand, urgency in every step. Italo followed without a word. She knew him. Not the way others did. Not with fear, but with trust. Because Lois had watched him for years, always near, always calm, always watching her mother's back. He never spoke much. But every time Lois passed him in the hallway, he'd tip his head, just slightly, like a secret shared between ghosts. And now she needed him. Down in the executive parking garage, Angela Nicole lay broken beside her car. Blood smeared the concrete. Her hand was still clutching her key fob. One shoe was missing. Italo knelt beside her. A long breath. A quiet curse in Italian. Then, the man they all forgot how to fear returned. Before we continue, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. The concrete was slick with blood. Angela's chest rose in shallow, ragged intervals, her mouth slightly parted, as if gasping for air beneath water. Italo Milano removed his jacket and pressed it against her side, hand firm but measured. Her ribs were broken. He could feel the unnatural give beneath her skin, and the way her breath hitched confirmed it. Lois stood frozen a few feet away, eyes wide, fists balled at her sides. "Lois," Italo said, voice low and calm, "go upstairs. Find a receptionist. Tell them to call emergency services again, and tell them it's critical." The girl hesitated, then nodded and sprinted off, ponytail whipping behind her. He leaned in, eyes scanning her injuries, his hand already applying pressure where the bleeding was worst. Angela had been hit hard multiple times, but none of the wounds looked fatal on their own. Combined, though, they were trying to drag her under. He took a penlight from his breast pocket, a strange item for a man dressed like a banker, and shone it into her eyes. The left pupil reacted slowly. The right didn't. "Damn," he murmured. She had a concussion, likely a cranial bleed. He needed to stabilize her head, but there was no proper color. He scanned the garage and spotted a collapsible caution sign near a service pillar. Snapping the plastic hinge loose, he refolded it, then carefully slid it behind her neck to brace her spine. Angela moaned, a wet sound in her throat. Her fingers twitched against the floor, curling as if reaching for something. Italo held her hand without thinking, the gesture quiet, instinctive. 5 years earlier, she'd reached for him the same way, in a courtroom that reeked of sweat, desperation, and rot. Back then, he hadn't worn suits. He'd worn chains. And she'd been the only one who didn't look away when he turned to face the bench. A junior attorney with fire in her voice and blood in her teeth, Angela Nicole had risked her career to expose a doctored federal warrant that would have buried Italo for good. She had lied on the record for him. He never forgot that. Never paid her back. Until now. Sirens wailed in the distance. Italo looked up as the elevator opened and Lois reappeared, panting. "They're coming." "They said less than 2 minutes," she said, then dropped to her knees beside her mother. Italo nodded once, still compressing the wound. "Good job." He saw her trembling but didn't comment. Angela's lips parted again. A whisper, barely audible. "Lois? I'm here, Mama," the girl said quickly, clutching her hand. Italo kept his expression unreadable as he shifted slightly, positioning Angela's legs to reduce blood pooling. Every move was deliberate, controlled, efficient. "You're not a banker," the security guard said behind him, voice shaking. Italo didn't look up. "Tell the EMTs her pulse is shallow and her breathing's worsening. They need a trauma team on standby." The guard paused. "Sir, I don't." "Then move," Italo snapped, and the man fled. He didn't raise his voice again. Not even when the paramedics finally rushed in. They barked orders, then paused when they saw the scene, Italo kneeling beside the bleeding CEO, makeshift brace in place, coat soaked red. "Who treated her?" the lead EMT asked. Italo stood, calmly. "She's got 3 cracked ribs, possible puncture. Blood pooling in the lower abdomen. Neck secured. Pressure applied to right side wound. Pupils unequal, possible cranial trauma." The paramedic blinked. "You medical?" Italo straightened his tie. "Retired." They moved swiftly, one of them pausing to glance back at him. "You bought her time. She would have been dead in 10 minutes. "I gave her 6, Italo said. "You gave her the rest." They loaded Angela onto a stretcher. Lois tried to follow but stumbled when her knees gave out. Italo caught her mid-fall. "You're coming too," he said. The paramedics didn't argue. 3 hours later, fluorescent lights buzzed quietly in the corner of the ICU waiting room. Lois sat curled up in a vinyl chair, head resting against Italo's shoulder. She hadn't spoken much after the ride. Just kept holding the binder her mother had told her never to open unless something bad happened. Now she clutched it like armor. The ER doctor approached quietly. "She's stable, but it was close. We had to perform an emergency laparotomy to stop internal bleeding. 3 cracked ribs, mild cranial bleeding, and a dislocated shoulder. She's lucky. Whoever helped her before we arrived likely saved her life." Italo only nodded. "She was conscious for a few minutes after surgery. Asked for her daughter. And for you." Lois sat up. "Can I see her?" The doctor hesitated, then said, "1 minute." They walked into the recovery room, everything cold and white and too still. Angela looked pale, fragile in a way she never had before. But when Lois whispered, "Mama," her mother's eyes opened. Low, Angela breathed, trying to lift her hand. "You're okay." Italo stepped back into the shadows of the room, silent. Angela's gaze found him. "You came. You called," he said simply. "No. I told her." "I know," Italo said, voice low. "You told her to find me." Angela nodded once before her eyes drifted closed again. Outside the room, the waiting area buzzed with fresh footsteps. A man in a press suit with a shaved head and sharp jawline entered, accompanied by 2 officers. "Victor Harrow." "Italo Milano," he said with a forced smile. "I hear you saved the day." Italo turned slowly. "Victor." The man extended a hand, but Italo didn't take it. "I came as soon as I heard," Harrow continued, glancing toward the ICU doors. "Horrible. Just horrible. How's she doing?" "She survived." "Well, that's a relief." The false sympathy was almost comical. Lois stepped out from behind the door, clutching the binder tighter. Victor's eyes dropped to it, but only for a second. "Lois," he said smoothly. "You're being very brave." She said nothing, only moved back toward Italo. "Police want to take statements," Victor added, turning toward the officers. "Naturally." One of them stepped forward. "We'll need to ask a few questions, Mr. Milano. You were the first on scene." I was nearby, Italo replied. You're a family friend? Investor, he said. Then added, old friend of Angela's. Victor narrowed his eyes slightly. You still keep ties to your former circles? Italo smiled faintly, almost kindly. Only the ones worth keeping. Of course. The officer hesitated. We'll follow up later. Right now, we're treating this as aggravated assault. No suspects yet. But we're reviewing surveillance footage. I'm sure you'll find something, Italo said. Victor leaned in slightly, voice a hush. If I were you, I'd let the professionals handle this. Wouldn't want anyone overstepping. Italo's gaze didn't flinch. If someone beat your CEO half to death, I'd expect you to overstep too. Victor pulled back. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, let's all just hope she recovers quickly. Later that night, as Lois drifted off on the waiting room couch, Italo stepped into the hallway. He stood beneath a muted television in the corner, watching as local news anchors speculated on the attack on Nicole Enterprises' CEO. Victor's face appeared briefly framed in concern. But Italo wasn't watching the news. He was watching the cameras. Security feeds easily tapped from his phone. He wasn't just a man in a suit. He was a man with access. And instincts. In one frame, from the garage cam, the shadows shifted, barely visible. Two figures. Fast. Coordinated. Faces masked. Angela never stood a chance. He saved her. Yes. But now he needed to find out why she'd been targeted. And why Victor Harrow was so eager to play innocent. He took one last look at Lois, then dialed a number he hadn't used in over a decade. A low voice answered. You calling means someone's dead or dying. Not yet, Italo replied. But someone will be. Italo Milano stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, the Manhattan skyline glittering like broken glass under moonlight. The city hadn't changed. But he had. The suit felt tighter around his shoulders, the silence louder than it used to be. His reflection in the glass looked like a ghost he no longer recognized, clean-shaven, well-tailored, calm. But the inside told a different story. He unbuttoned his vest slowly, deliberate as a man disarming a bomb. The gun holstered at his side was still warm. His hands didn't shake. They never did. That had always been his gift and his curse. They called him the surgeon in the old days. Not because he saved lives. Because he took them with surgical precision. No blood spray. No panic. Just clean, quiet removal like a cancer no one talked about. Angela had been the first and only person to see him bleeding. Years ago, he was moments from being locked away for good, feds ready to bury him under RICO charges and fabricated evidence. They had tapes, doctored documents, paid witnesses. Then, she walked into the courtroom, just a junior defense attorney assigned to a case no one wanted. She was supposed to lose. She didn't. She found the glitch in the wiretap chain, challenged the search warrant, and exposed the prosecution's false trail. What no one knew was that she also passed him a message during a recess, 6 handwritten words on a napkin. Don't testify. Leave town. Tonight. He followed it. And she never looked back. Neither did he. Until now. A knock rattled the quiet. Italo walked to the door without haste and opened it halfway. A young woman with frizzy hair and round glasses stood in the hall, clutching a black leather binder. I don't have long, she whispered. Angela told me if anything happened, bring this to you. He let her in without a word. She sat down on the edge of his leather couch like a student waiting to be scolded. She made me swear. Said if she ever ended up hurt, to come to you first. Not police. Not the board. The binder was heavy. Unlabeled. Italo opened it carefully. Inside were spreadsheets, timeline diagrams, and nondescript project titles. At first glance, it looked like corporate planning material. But the moment his eyes scanned the symbols in the margins, circle slashes, triangles and corners, initials that didn't match any real division he knew. Angela had encrypted something. And he was meant to find it. What is this? He asked quietly. I don't know, the assistant said. But she worked on it in secret. Never let anyone near it. She told you to bring it only to me. Yes, she said, you'd know what to do. Italo didn't respond. He flipped a page and paused. There it was again. That symbol. He recognized it, not from boardrooms or financial reports. From an old family ledger. One used for laundering money through Sicilian vineyards and shell charities. It wasn't just about fraud. This was a map. A money trail, hidden in plain sight, laced through legitimate channels. And only someone who understood the old codes would see it. Angela had hidden it in corporate clean ink. He stared at a column labeled Project Halo, Q4 Optimization. There, scrawled in blue ink, was a single phrase. Lois knows the key. He closed the binder slowly. The next morning, he met Lois in the hospital cafeteria. She picked at a croissant silent. He placed the binder on the table and said, "Your mom said you'd know how to open this." Lois blinked. She always made me solve puzzles. What kind of puzzles? Ones that looked boring, but weren't. He opened to the page with the strange headings. "Does this mean anything to you?" he asked, pointing. Lois studied it, brow furrowed, then whispered, "Wait, the timeline. It's a Fibonacci sequence." Italo looked at her surprised. She said in chaos, "There's math." It was like our thing. "Can you show me?" Lois nodded, took a pencil, and began circling letters in a pattern. Within minutes, words formed out of the maze. Harrow. Shell. Dolphin code. 8 banks. Italo leaned in closer, heart steady, but blood running cold. Victor Harrow. The smiling CO. Angela's second in command. He wasn't just involved. He was running the whole thing. Fake subsidiaries. Inflated contracts. Wire routing through Cayman accounts labeled under Dolphin Group. But it was the next revelation that stopped him cold. A wire transfer noted in the binder was made to a consulting firm, Moretti Holdings. The same Moretti Italo had once trained as a boy in the old life. Luca Moretti. He stood up slowly, voice low. "Get someone to sit with your mom. I have somewhere to be." Lois frowned. "Where?" "Back into a part of the world I swore I left behind." That evening, Italo sat on his balcony, binder open, city lights dancing across the glass. Angela had hidden this information for months, maybe longer. She hadn't trusted anyone. Except him. And Lois. The pieces began fitting together like teeth in a locked jaw. Victor Harrow was laundering tens of millions through shell companies. Angela had discovered it, documented it, and coded it. But instead of exposing it publicly, she created a failsafe Lois. He remembered the favor Angela had done for him all those years ago. And now she had gambled her life on the hope that he'd still be the man she once saved. His phone buzzed. A message from an encrypted app only 5 people in the city knew how to use. "We need to talk. Tonight. Bring the book." No name. No location. But the signal came from the east side. And Italo already knew who had sent it. Luca Moretti. If someone you loved encoded their final warning into a puzzle only you could solve, would you be brave enough to open it? Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were Lois? And don't forget to subscribe, the secrets in this story are just getting started. Luca Moretti entered Nicole Enterprises the way a wolf enters a sheep pen, silent, confident, and hungry. He wore an immaculate gray suit that fit like sin, his dark hair slicked back, the faint scar under his eye only sharpening the menace in his face. Security guards stood taller when he passed, though none dared meet his gaze. Victor Harrow introduced him as a private consultant brought in to tighten company security after recent events. But Italo Milano knew better. The name hit him like the aftertaste of gunpowder. Luca. The last time they had spoken, Italo had a gun in his hand and blood on his shirt, Luca's doing. He had been 20 years old then, ambitious, fearless, the closest thing Italo had to family in that world. And Italo had made him a killer. In those days, Luca had been his shadow, quick, loyal, eager to please. He'd fetched coffee during meetings with dons, cleaned up messes, and learned how to disappear bodies before he learned how to drive. But loyalty in their world was a coin that flipped both ways. When Italo began stepping back, talking about cleaning out, Luca saw it as weakness. He didn't want freedom, he wanted the throne. Italo remembered the night clearly, the smell of wet concrete and exhaust in a Brooklyn alley. Luca had come to him with a gun drawn, his hand steady. "You taught me everything," he had said. "But I don't want to be your shadow anymore." Italo didn't flinch. He simply took the gun from Luca's trembling hand and broke 3 of his fingers instead of killing him. Then he'd walked away, leaving the kid screaming on the ground, a promise echoing in his head, "If you come for me again, make it count." And now he was back. Victor Harrow welcomed Luca into the company like a weapon disguised as a consultant. On the surface, Luca's new role was legitimate: corporate risk assessment, personnel management, and security reorganization. Behind the facade, he was there for one reason: find out who saved Angela Nicole. And eliminate them. Italo knew it wouldn't take long before Luca realized who it was. That evening, Italo drove through the city rain toward the hospital. He parked across from the glowing glass facade and watched for a moment, headlights slicing through drizzle. Lois was upstairs, asleep in a cot beside her mother's bed. Angela's recovery was slow but steady, though her bruises still painted her skin in shades of purple and blue. Italo stepped out, the collar of his coat turned up against the storm. Angela stirred when he entered the room. Her eyes opened, tired but sharp. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. He closed the door softly behind him. Neither should he. Who? Luca Moretti. Harrow brought him in under the guise of security. Angela's breath caught. "Is he dangerous?" she asked, though the question was rhetorical. "He's not dangerous," Italo said flatly. "He is danger." She looked at him, her voice trembling with frustration. "Then we end this. Harrow thinks he can bury me, but I won't go quietly." "Angela," he said, moving closer, "you don't understand what kind of men you're dealing with." "I understand perfectly," she countered. "This company was built on blood, Italo. But it will not fall on it." He studied her, her defiance, her fire. Even half-broken in a hospital bed, she was still the woman who once stared down a judge and rewrote his fate. For a brief moment, he saw something that wasn't fear or strategy. It was conviction, the kind he'd lost years ago. "You've changed," she said softly. "So have you," he replied. "I thought you left that world behind." "I tried," he said, looking away. "But it seems the world didn't return the favor." Angela managed a faint smile. "Then maybe you were never meant to leave it completely." The words lingered in the quiet room like cigarette smoke. He wanted to argue, but the truth sat too heavy in his chest. "I'll keep Lois close," he finally said. Angela's expression softened. "She trusts you. More than anyone." "She shouldn't," he muttered, but Angela only closed her eyes, exhausted. The next morning, Italo met Lois in the hospital cafeteria. She was drawing on a napkin, legs swinging off the chair. When she saw him, she smiled, though her eyes carried shadows far older than her 9 years. "Mom says you're the only person she trusts." "Your mother exaggerates," Italo said. "No, she doesn't," Lois replied. "She said you helped her a long time ago." Italo gave a faint smile. "Something like that." Lois tilted her head. "Are you going to help her again?" He looked down at the black binder tucked under his arm. "That's the plan." Then she leaned forward. "Then I want to help too." "You've done enough," he said, but her expression hardened. "She told me to be brave." "I can do what she does." Italo hesitated, then slid the binder across the table. "Do you remember what you did before the pattern you found?" Lois nodded. "The numbers?" "Yeah." "There's something else," he said, flipping to a new page. "Your mom kept another file, a digital one. She told me it was hidden." Lois squinted at the printed diagram. "That's a cipher lock. You know what that means?" She grinned. "Mom made me one for my birthday last year." Italo exhaled quietly. Of course she did. He placed a small black USB on the table. This was in her office safe. She encoded it. "I need you to tell me how to open it." Lois turned it over in her hands, her fingers tracing the engraved initials. "Anne." She said if anything happened, there would be a phrase, Italo added. "Something she told only you." Lois's brow furrowed. A phrase. For a long moment, She was silent, lips moving as if reciting something only she could hear. Then she whispered, "The blood of silence binds the truth." The moment she said it, Italo froze. He plugged the USB into his encrypted laptop and entered the phrase. A new folder appeared on screen, hidden beneath a false directory of company budgets. Inside were encrypted ledgers, offshore transfers, and name after name of dummy corporations. Lois leaned forward. "What's all that?" Italo's jaw tightened. "Proof." He scrolled through the list, his eyes darkening. Each transaction led back to Harrow and one name that shouldn't have been there at all. Luca Moretti. The link wasn't just business. It was personal. Money funneled into shell security firms, contracts signed under alias, and a consulting retainer that predated Angela's attack by 6 months. Luca had been on payroll long before Harrow made his move. The attack hadn't been impulsive, it was orchestrated. Italo shut the laptop and leaned back, exhaling through his nose. Lois looked up. "What does it mean?" "It means," he said quietly, "that the wolves were already inside the house." Lois frowned. "Then we lock the doors." He smiled faintly. "You sound just like her." That night, Italo sat outside the hospital on a bench beneath a street lamp. Rain fell again, soft this time, steady. He lit a cigarette and watched the smoke spiral upward, thinking of Luca. He had always known the past would find him, but he never expected it to wear an expensive suit and a corporate badge. The world had changed its colors, but the poison underneath was the same. He thought of the boy Luca had been, the eager apprentice with blood on his knuckles and pride in his voice. He'd trained him to be efficient, disciplined, controlled. Never cruel. But Luca had learned cruelty on his own. And now the student was hunting the teacher. Italo dropped the cigarette into a puddle and stood, pulling his coat tighter. Inside, Angela slept. Lois dreamed. And upstairs, a security camera blinked red, feeding footage to someone watching closely. Somewhere across town, Luca Moretti smiled at the screen, sipping whiskey. "Hello again, old man," he murmured. "Looks like we're not done after all." Angela Nicole stood in front of the full-length mirror in her hospital room, wrapping a silk scarf around her throat to hide the bruises. Her sling was secured tight against her side, the broken ribs still raw with each breath. But her gaze was steel. No hesitation. No fear. Lois sat on the bed behind her, legs crossed, blazer buttoned, ponytail straight. "You ready?" Angela asked without turning. Lois nodded once. "Are you?" Angela gave a faint smile. "I've never been more ready to go to war." Then they walked out, side by side, mother and daughter, testimony and truth. Italo Milano waited in the hallway, arms folded, face unreadable beneath the brim of his charcoal fedora. He looked her over and said nothing. But his silence carried weight. A silent vow that if anything went wrong, he would be the last thing Harrow ever saw. Angela didn't flinch. "Let's end this." They arrived at the top floor of Nicole Enterprises just before 9 a.m. The boardroom was already full, 8 directors in dark suits murmuring over coffee and printed agendas. Victor Harrow stood at the head of the table, charming, composed, every inch the concerned COO. "Angela," he said, smiled just a hair too tight. "We weren't expecting you today." "Clearly," she replied, walking in without pause. Lois followed, small but composed, carrying the black USB drive in her palm like a weapon. Angela took her seat at the far end of the long glass table, flanked by board members who couldn't quite look her in the eye. Victor remained standing, trying to steer the energy. "We're all very concerned, of course," he began. "But this isn't the time to be making claims. You're still recovering and—" "This is exactly the time," Angela interrupted. She opened her laptop, plugged in the USB, and began projecting files onto the wall-mounted screen. Over the last 18 months, money has been siphoned out of this company in increments too small to trigger immediate scrutiny, but large enough to fund an empire. Numbers filled the screen. Charts. Shell company names. Timelines. The board murmured as confusion turned to concern. Lois tapped keys beside her, the data unfolding like a spiderweb. Victor chuckled lightly, as if embarrassed for her. Angela, these are internal project budgets. You're mistaken. No, she said, clicking to the next slide. You are. These are dummy accounts, fake vendors, falsified contracts, all routed through Dolphin Group and Moretti Holdings. You've been moving millions, Victor. He shook his head with forced sympathy. I think you're still in shock. Maybe you bumped your head harder than we thought. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Angela clicked again. A page filled the screen, one bearing Victor Harrow's signature on 6 different transactions. Another click, email correspondences. Another, bank transfers with timestamps. The room fell quiet. The air turned heavy. Victor's eyes went flat. That's enough, he said sharply. Angela stared at him. No, Victor. We're just getting started. She turned to the board. You trusted him. So did I. But he tried to kill me. Gasps rippled around the room. Victor laughed. Are you hearing this? She's unwell. Delusional. Angela looked to Lois. The girl nodded. Mom gave me this before it happened, Lois said calmly. She told me, if something bad happened, I had to bring it to Mr. Milano. One of the board members frowned. Milano? That man's still involved. Angela didn't answer. She didn't have to. Victor's smile twitched. Then he glanced at the 2 security guards by the doors. They nodded, just barely. One reached into his jacket. Angela saw it before anyone else. Get down, she shouted. But before anyone could move, guns were drawn. Chaos exploded in seconds. Board members screamed. Chairs scraped. Lois hit the floor, arms over her head. Victor backed toward the wall, barking orders. The 2 armed men advanced toward Angela. But they never reached her. The glass door to the hallway shattered as Italo Milano moved. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. The first man raised his weapon. Italo stepped inside his guard and broke his wrist with a crack. The gun clattered. Italo kicked it across the room. The second man swung. Italo ducked and drove an elbow into his throat. 5 seconds. Both were down. Victor reached for a letter opener from the table. Italo caught his arm mid-swing and slammed him against the glass wall so hard it spiderwebbed on impact. You should have finished what you started, Italo said, his voice like gravel wrapped in velvet. Victor gasped for air, eyes wide, teeth bared. I didn't mean. Italo pressed harder. You tried to kill her. You sent Luca. The room froze. Lois stood up slowly, shaking. Angela had one hand clutched to her side, but her eyes locked on Victor's. You always thought you were smarter than everyone. Turns out you just hired the wrong monster. Sirens screamed outside the building. Moments later, the doors burst open and 4 FBI agents swept in, weapons raised. Federal agents, one shouted. Everyone hands up. Italo stepped back, releasing Victor. On the floor, the agent barked at Harrow. Victor's face crumpled. I'm COO of this company. You're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted homicide, another agent cut in. As the cuffs clicked, Victor looked to Angela. You think this ends with me? He snarled. You have no idea what you're waking up. Angela stood tall. Then let them wake. The agents dragged Victor out as the board sat in stunned silence. Lois moved to Angela's side and squeezed her hand. Angela looked to Italo. He stood near the broken door, untouched, composed. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. If you were in Angela's place, facing down the man who tried to kill you, with the power to end him, would you stop at justice or take revenge? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you want to see what happens when ghosts from Italo's past come knocking, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Victor Harrow sat hunched over the steel table in the FBI interrogation room, his cuffed hands motionless, his lips stubbornly sealed. The agent across from him was calm, deliberate, sliding photo after photo across the table, offshore transfers, fake contracts, encrypted emails, all connected to his name. Harrow stared at each one with blank detachment, as if the evidence was a boring presentation he could outwait. You think I'm the top of the tree, he finally muttered. I'm just the guy who picked the fruit. Agent DeWitt leaned forward. Then give us the gardener. Harrow shook his head slowly. You dig deep enough, you'll find roots you're not ready to pull. The agent glanced through the one-way mirror, where Italo stood, arms folded, watching every move. He wasn't law enforcement. But this wasn't about the law. This was about what came before the law, before boardrooms and badges. The world of silent deals, veiled threats, and oaths that bound tighter than blood. Italo hadn't slept since the board meeting. He didn't need to. Adrenaline had taken the wheel. Back at his penthouse, the USB Angela and Lois had unlocked still sat inside his laptop, its contents now decrypted. Most of the files were financial, detailing 2 years of laundering, fraud, and backdoor payoffs. But one folder had remained untouched, hidden under layers of encryption. Angela had labeled it simply, Red Room. Italo entered the final passphrase, Vita per Vita. Life for life. Inside were 28 names. Politicians, judges, CEOs. Every one of them linked to private accounts traced back to Dominic Verratti. The files weren't just about stolen money. They were about control. Verratti had been buying silence with luxury villas, stock options, private school tuitions, and offshore bank protection. The same kind of leverage Italo had once used for the family before he walked away. And there, at the top of the list, dated 6 weeks before Angela's attack, was an authorization for strategic asset disposal. The language was cold, corporate. But Italo knew exactly what it meant. He leaned back in his chair, the city lights blinking behind him like watching eyes. Verratti hadn't just signed off on silencing Angela. He had signed off on Italo's execution years ago, an order that had never been withdrawn. Back then, Italo had vanished before the job could be done. But now, by saving Angela, he'd stepped back into the light, and Verratti had noticed. Lois entered the room carrying 2 mugs of cocoa, handing him one without a word. She sat beside him, curling her legs underneath her. Is that the list? Italo nodded once. She stared at the screen, quiet. Mom said some people have power they never earned. But that makes it mean less, not more. He looked at her for a long moment. Your mother's smarter than anyone I know. Angela arrived later that night, her arms still in a sling, the bruises fading to yellow across her jaw. She looked at the screen, scrolling slowly through the names. When she reached Verratti, her hand paused on the mouse. So it wasn't about the money, she said softly. It was about silencing me. Italo nodded. You got too close to something sacred. She sat back in the chair, exhaling. What would happen if we released this? Careers would end. Elections would be overturned. And people would come after you all over again. She turned toward him. Then help me do it anyway. You sure? They already tried to kill me. I'm not afraid anymore. Italo paced the room, hands behind his back, the scent of aged leather and rain drifting in through the open windows. Once this is out, he said, there's no going back to pretending. No more corporate defenses. No more guarded press releases. No more boardrooms. Angela stood. I'm not here to be safe. I'm here to be honest. He turned to her slowly. You're not just fighting a man, Angela. You're fighting a machine. And Verratti is the machine. She smiled faintly. Then it's time someone showed people where the wires are. Lois, still sitting on the floor, looked up. We can call it the Red Room Files. Like a story. Like the truth dressed up in something people will want to read. Angela bent down and kissed the top of her daughter's head. Exactly, sweetheart. We tell the truth so loudly, they can't bury it. Italo said nothing for a moment, then nodded once. I'll handle Verratti. Angela turned to him, concern flaring. You're going to him? I have to, Italo said. You're playing chess with a man who still believes in knives. He needs to see my face. Angela reached for his wrist. Promise me you'll come back. Italo's expression was unreadable. I don't make promises I can't keep. She frowned. That's not enough. He pulled free gently. It has to be. The next evening, Italo stepped into La Ferrera, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, oak-paneled walls, antique chandeliers, and waiters who knew better than to ask names. He was met at the bar by a hostess who said, Mr. Verratti is expecting you. She led him through a narrow corridor, past wine racks older than most countries, to a private dining room at the back. Dominic Veretti sat alone, nursing a glass of Barolo, his silver hair immaculate, his suit flawless. "Italo," he said with a smirk. "You've aged well for a dead man." Italo took the seat across from him without smiling. "You always liked dramatic entries," Veretti continued, swirling his wine. "But I never expected you to come knocking." "I came to talk," Italo said. "I doubt that," Veretti replied. "You were never much for words." Until now. The silence between them stretched like piano wire. "I assume this is about Angela Nicole," Veretti said eventually. "You should have stayed out of it." "She saved me once," Italo said. "This was me returning the favor." "And in the process," Veretti said with a sigh, "you've stirred up a great deal of noise." "You tried to have her killed." Veretti shrugged. "I authorized a solution to a liability. I don't apologize for maintaining the chain." Italo leaned forward. "You broke the code, Dominic. We never went after women." "Not like that." "There are no codes anymore," Veretti said, suddenly cold. "Only survivors." "Then survive this," Italo said, sliding a small USB across the table. Veretti picked it up, barely glancing at it. "Is this supposed to scare me?" "No. It's just your last chance to step away quietly. I have senators on speed dial." "You won't when this goes public." Veretti's smirk faded. "You're bluffing," he said. Italo stood. "You're old, Dominic. And you forgot what happens when ghosts stop playing dead." He turned and walked out, leaving the file behind like a lit fuse. The door clicked shut behind him. Veretti stared at the USB, and for the first time in a decade, he felt uncertain. Italo Milano sat alone in his penthouse, a tumbler of scotch untouched beside him, the lights off, the city flickering like distant fire. The confrontation with Veretti had left him unsettled in ways he couldn't name. The old world had opened its jaws again, and he'd stepped willingly into its teeth. He'd made it out once, clean enough to breathe without looking over his shoulder. But walking back in, even for Angela and Lois, had stirred ghosts he'd buried in silence. His hands remembered things he didn't want to recall. The weight of a suppressed pistol. The precise angle of a carotid strike. The slow exhale after watching a man fall and not get back up. He hadn't forgotten, he'd simply folded it away. Now, the fold had reopened. The next morning, he wandered into the training room he barely used anymore. Everything was still there: sandbags, free weights, gloves, mats. He ran a hand over the speed bag, then punched it once, watching it tremble. His knuckles ached from memory. Violence wasn't just in his history. It was in his blood. Angela had always wanted the truth. But there was one truth he'd never spoken aloud. The night the federal judge who'd pursued Angela's disbarment was found dead in his home, it had been ruled a heart attack. It wasn't. Italo had made it look clean. He remembered the judge's last words, accusatory, trembling, full of righteousness. "You're nothing but a killer." And maybe he was. But that night, he wasn't killing for a paycheck. He was killing for her. She never knew. Or so he thought. Angela arrived at his penthouse later that afternoon. She moved slower now, her injuries still healing, but her gaze was sharp, searching. He poured her tea and said nothing as she took the seat across from him. "Veretti hasn't responded," she said. "He's thinking," Italo replied. She studied him. "Something's different." He didn't respond. Angela set her cup down. "I spoke with Agent DeWitt. She said the judge who tried to bury my law license died under strange circumstances." Italo's eyes lifted slightly. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" she asked. Silence stretched between them. Then, quietly, he said, "He had the final vote. He would have ruined you. Everything you've built, it would have never existed." Angela didn't flinch. "So you killed him?" "Yes." She sat back, absorbing the words without shock. "You think I didn't know the man I was saving," she said. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, he saw no judgment in her face. "You can't protect me by hiding the monster," she continued. "You have to forgive him." Italo's throat tightened. "I don't think I can." Angela leaned forward, her voice softer now. You saved my life. You raised my daughter's hope when I couldn't even hold her hand. That doesn't come from a monster. It comes from guilt, he said. And guilt isn't the same as redemption. No, she agreed. But it's a start. She stood and kissed his temple. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. Later that evening, Lois woke screaming from a nightmare. Italo reached her room first, instinct dragging him faster than thought. She sat up in bed, breath ragged, fists clenched around her blanket. It's okay, he said gently, kneeling beside her. You're safe. She clung to him without speaking. He held her, one hand on her back, steady and calm. It was the garage again, she whispered. The man with the ski mask. I could hear Mom screaming. Italo closed his eyes. He's gone. He can't hurt her. Or you. Lois pulled back and looked at him. Can you teach me how not to be scared? What do you mean? I want to fight. Like you. I want to know what to do if something ever happens again. Italo hesitated, but saw the truth in her eyes. She didn't want revenge. She wanted strength. The next day, he brought her to the training room. He wrapped her hands carefully, showing her how to make a proper fist. Not too tight. You don't want to break your own fingers before you land a punch. Lois grinned. I like this already. Italo smiled back, something warm stirring beneath the weight he carried. He started with basic stances, breath control, footwork. She picked it up faster than expected, sharp, focused, driven. Is this what you used to do? She asked, throwing a jab. He paused. It's a version of it. The better version. Did Mom know? She knew enough, he said. She says you saved her twice, Lois replied. Italo looked at her, quiet. She saved me first. Then he adjusted her elbow. You're dropping too soon. Keep it high. Lois nodded, eyes fierce with purpose. Days passed. Then a week. The nightmares didn't vanish, but they faded. Lois's punches grew cleaner. Her stance more balanced. Angela watched from the hallway, sometimes unseen. She never interrupted. Their bond grew, not just protector and child, but partners in survival. Italo began to see her not as someone he was shielding, but someone he was preparing. And with each session, the monster he feared inside him grew quieter. Not because it was gone, but because it was being seen and still loved. One night, after practice, Lois handed him a drawing. It showed the three of them, Angela, Lois, and Italo, standing in front of a burning building, holding hands. Above it, she had written, "We're stronger than fire." He felt the paper tremble in his hands. And something inside him finally exhaled. Then Angela's phone rang. She was in the kitchen, pouring tea, the steam curling in the light. She picked it up, her brow furrowing. This is Angela Nicole. She paused, then froze. What do you mean he's missing? Italo turned instantly. Who? Angela lowered the phone slowly. The witness. The one set to testify against Verratti next week. He was under FBI protection. They found the apartment empty. Blood on the door. No sign of forced entry. The room fell silent. Angela's hand tightened around the edge of the counter. They're taking out loose ends, she said. Italo's eyes narrowed. Then we take the fight to them. They found the witness's body 2 days later, face down in a motel bathtub just outside Hoboken. His name had been redacted from public documents, guarded by FBI relocation protocols, hidden under aliases, but it hadn't mattered. A single bullet to the head, neat and practiced. Whoever did it knew how to clean a crime scene and vanish. It was a message, not a murder. Angela stared at the report with trembling fingers. The page blurred before her eyes, rage and dread climbing in equal measure. She had trusted the system to protect him, and now he was gone. Another voice silenced. Another checkmark on someone's hit list. They're wiping the board, Italo said quietly. He stood across the room, arms folded, jaw tight. Angela looked at him, voice rough. How many more? Anyone connected to Veratti's offshore trails, he replied. He's scrubbing the records and the people who carry them. And we're next, she said. Italo didn't answer. Angela crossed the room and dropped the folder on the table. This has to end. Now. We're not ready, he said. You go public with this, it makes you a target again. A louder one. Angela's voice sharpened. So what? We wait for him to come to our front door. He moved closer, calm but firm. You have a daughter. You've already danced with death once. You really want to go for another round with no armor. Angela didn't blink. So what do we do, run? Her voice cracked on the last word, not from weakness, but fury. Italo exhaled slowly. I don't know. But we need a plan, not just a reaction. A small voice broke the silence. I already made one. Lois stood in the hallway, holding a tablet in her hands. Both adults turned. Angela's eyes narrowed. Lois, what did you do? The girl stepped into the room and held up the screen. On it was a drafted article. Headline: Blood Money, the secret network behind America's cleanest politicians. Below it, a detailed breakdown of Verity's shell corporations, Harrow's laundering trails, the judge's suspicious death, and Angela's near-fatal attack. All of it written in crisp, anonymous prose. I sent it to a journalist. The one who broke the Catalyst scandal. Angela's heart dropped. You what? Lois didn't flinch. I sent it under an anonymous account. I used 3 layers of VPN. They won't trace it back to us. Italo stepped forward. Lois. But there was something else in his voice, respect. I couldn't sleep, Lois continued. I kept thinking, what if something happens again and we didn't do anything? What if we let them win? Angela knelt beside her daughter, grasping her shoulders. Lo, this world isn't fair. It's not like the stories you read. I know, Lois whispered. That's why I wrote one. They stared at her and realized they weren't protecting a child. They were standing beside a survivor, a fighter in her own right. And now the truth was out. The article went live 20 minutes later. It spread like wildfire. Journalists reposted it. Activists dissected it. The public devoured it. And the government scrambled. The name Verity was on every headline by noon. Cable news anchors debated the allegations. Political analysts speculated on resignations. Talk shows brought in ethics panels. But the most damning evidence came from the financial records, a signature trail even the best PR couldn't bury. Within hours, congressional aides leaked statements. A senator from New Jersey quietly stepped down. A prominent judge canceled 3 hearings without notice. The Department of Justice issued a formal review. And Verity, silent through it all, released a single line through a spokesperson. These claims are baseless and beneath the dignity of a response. But silence was no longer armor. At Nicole Enterprises, security tripled. Lois was pulled from school. Angela's face appeared on every major outlet, but she refused interviews. We let the files speak, she told Italo. The rest will fall into place. He nodded, but didn't relax. Because he knew better. That night, Angela attended a closed-door strategy meeting with her legal team. Italo insisted on driving her himself, despite her objections. She parked underground, nodding as he scanned the lot before letting her out. 2 hours, she said. Then we're home. He nodded. I'll be waiting right here. She walked inside, heels clicking on cold concrete. Italo leaned against the driver's side door and exhaled, watching the entrance. Rain had started again, soft and thin. He reached into his coat pocket for a mint when something caught his eye. A wire too thin, just beneath the front bumper. His body moved before thought did. He sprinted toward the building, shouting, Angela! She turned just as the car behind him exploded, fire and steel spraying like shrapnel. The shockwave knocked her to the ground. Smoke filled the garage, alarms wailing, sprinklers sputtering to life. Italo reached her in seconds, dragging her behind a support pillar. Her ears rang. Blood trickled from her scalp. But she was breathing. And alive. He pulled her close, checking for broken bones, searching her eyes. She blinked slowly, dazed. Was that the car? Your car, he said grimly. It was rigged. She exhaled, ragged. Verity. Message received, Italo growled. But this time, they wouldn't wait to reply. Would you go public if you knew doing so might cost you your life, but silence would cost others theirs? Let us know in the comments, and if you're ready to see the firestorm that follows this explosion, subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. The garage still smelled like burnt rubber and scorched metal. Smoke clung to the concrete like a memory that refused to leave. Emergency crews swarmed the scene, their voices muffled under the shriek of alarms and the soft hiss of sprinkler runoff. Paramedics wheeled Angela into the ambulance, her vitals stable but rattled, while Lois sat wrapped in a thermal blanket, eyes wide and stunned. Italo stood nearby, bruised but standing, his clothes dusted with soot, his silence heavier than any words. The explosion had missed him by seconds. It was skill and instinct that saved them, nothing more. But Italo knew what it really was, a declaration of war. Veretti wasn't just erasing loose ends. He was lighting the whole board on fire. Angela's car was gone. Charred, crumpled metal barely recognizable as a vehicle. The blast had been precise, detonated by a pressure trigger tied to her door. If she'd driven herself that night, there wouldn't have been anything left to bury. Lois hadn't spoken for a full hour after the explosion. When she finally did, her voice cracked. He tried to take her away from me. Italo didn't respond. He just held her. The next morning, the FBI issued an international warrant. Dominic Veretti had vanished from U.S. soil. Private jet. False identity. Pre-cleared airspace. Gone before the news even aired. But Italo knew where he'd go. Veretti was old Mafia, old blood. And men like him had only a handful of places they trusted when the tides turned. Italo passed the intel to the bureau, then turned to the last name still burning in the back of his mind. Luca Moretti. He hadn't seen Luca since the day Harrow was arrested. But whispers came fast in their world. Luca hadn't run. He was circling, watching, waiting. The warehouse came as no surprise, a forgotten dockside facility near the East River, condemned but still standing, just like the men who used it. Italo left his weapons behind. This wasn't about bullets. This was about closure. He arrived just after midnight, the city quiet and wet from fresh rain. A single bulb flickered above the entrance. Inside, shadows stretched between rusted beams and cracked windows. Luca stood in the center of the room, shirt sleeves rolled, knife in hand, smirking like the devil himself. "You took your time," he said. Italo said nothing. He stepped forward, removing his coat and tossing it to the ground. Luca rolled his shoulders. "I figured you'd come. You're predictable, old man." "You're sloppy," Italo replied. "And cruel." "That's rich, coming from the man who made me." Luca lunged first. The blade sliced the air where Italo's chest had been a second before. He ducked, pivoted, caught Luca's wrist, and slammed him into a beam. The knife clattered. They scrambled, fists cracking against ribs and bone. The fight was fast, brutal, personal. There was no elegance in it. Only rage. Years of betrayal. Of burned loyalty and broken codes. Of a brotherhood poisoned by ambition. Luca landed a punch that split Italo's lip. Italo answered with an elbow that snapped Luca's nose. They crashed to the floor, rolling through dust and rust, old chains clattering in protest. The knife reappeared, Luca's fingers wrapping around the handle again. He slashed, grazed Italo's side, then Italo disarmed him with a vicious stomp and twisted his arm until it broke. Luca screamed. Pinned now, breath ragged, eyes wide with fury. "You don't get to win," Luca spat. "You killed her future. You left me. I saved you." Italo held the knife. Its weight familiar, tempting. He pressed it against Luca's throat. Luca smiled through the pain. "Go ahead," he growled. "Be who you really are." "I'm not your monster anymore," Italo said. He dropped the knife. Stepped back. Let the silence fall. "You were my mistake," he said. "But you don't get to define me." "Then you're already dead," Luca hissed. Italo walked away without looking back. The city swallowed him once more. Behind him, sirens approached. Angela had sent backup. She always knew where he'd be. By sunrise, Veredi's jet was intercepted off the coast of Spain. Interpol grounded him in Barcelona. He stepped off the tarmac flanked by agents, silent as ever. But the photos spread like wildfire, captured, cuffed, and caught. The fire was over. Now came the flood. Angela watched the footage from her office, Lois curled beside her. News anchors called her a whistleblower, a survivor, a hero. She didn't feel like any of those things. She felt like someone who had crawled through fire to breathe. And every breath still tasted like smoke. Later that day, the Department of Justice called. The voice on the other end was formal, steady. "Miss Nicole, the Senate Oversight Committee would like to request your testimony." Angela blinked. "You want me to speak?" "Yes," the voice replied. "They want to hear how deep it went, how far they were willing to go, and how you survived it." Angela looked out the window. Below, the city moved like nothing had changed. But everything had. And now it was time to tell the world. 1 year later, the world remembered Angela Nicole not as a survivor, but as a storm. Nicole Enterprises had emerged from scandal not just intact, but redefined. The board had been rebuilt, the finances audited, the ethics committee restructured. But Angela didn't stop there. She stepped down as CEO and launched a foundation called Clear Signal, devoted to protecting whistleblowers inside corrupt systems. What began as a desk in a co-working space had grown into a multi-city operation. Former FBI analysts, corporate investigators, and pro bono lawyers worked under her direction. Their cases ranged from embezzlement to environmental cover-ups, each file a ripple from the impact Veredi tried to bury. Angela had made it her mission to ensure no one would be silenced the way she nearly was. And for every case won, she saw a bit more of the fire in Lois's eyes reflect back at her. Lois had become her own force. 10 years old and already teaching weekend coding workshops for younger kids, she'd also started a book club called Unmasked. The first book they read? Ghosts Don't Wear Capes, written under a pseudonym Italo refused to admit was his. It told the story of a quiet man who fought monsters no one else could see, not with powers, but with presence. Lois had read it cover to cover 3 times. Then told her mom, "I think Mr. Italo is the ghost." Angela had laughed, but didn't correct her. Italo Milano now lived in a brownstone 2 streets from the Nicole home. The place was quiet, modest, shaded by oaks, and always smelled faintly of roasted espresso. He never rejoined any firm, never spoke to reporters, and never stepped in front of a camera. But on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, the sounds of gloves hitting punching bags echoed out of the basement windows. He called it a youth program. The neighborhood kids called it the den. He taught discipline, not aggression. Stability, not strength. He never told them about his past, not the streets, the blood, or the knife fights in warehouses. But every punch he showed them carried the wisdom of battles won and wars survived. He didn't ask questions. He just listened, corrected, and handed out bruised knuckles like they were lessons. Lois came by often. Sometimes to spar, sometimes to sit cross-legged on the mat with a book while he coached. She always brought tea, never coffee, and reminded him to stretch so his hip wouldn't lock up. She was the only one allowed to tease him. The only one who saw the man beyond the myth. And the only person who ever made him believe that monsters could put their claws down for good. On her 10th birthday, the yard behind Angela's house was strung with lights and filled with laughter. Kids ran barefoot through the grass, balloons tangled in tree branches. Angela stood at the grill, apron on, flipping burgers while fielding phone calls from lawyers and donors alike. Italo sat on the porch, sipping lemonade, watching the chaos unfold with an amused smirk. Lois ran toward him, hair bouncing, a gift-wrapped box in her arms. "This one's from me and Mom," she said, handing it to him with both hands. Italo raised an eyebrow. "Is it breakable?" "Only if you're scared," she teased. He opened the box slowly, peeling back the paper to reveal a leather-bound journal. The cover read, "How to Protect What Matters" in gold foil. He held it carefully, thumbing through the blank pages. "Figured it was time you wrote your own story," Angela said from behind him. He looked up at her, heart caught in his throat. I've been trying not to remember too much of it, he admitted. Maybe it's not about remembering, she replied. Maybe it's about choosing what gets to stay. He set the journal on the table and leaned back. It's time I stopped hiding, he said. Angela smiled. You already have. No, he said softly. This time I mean all of it. And she understood. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Angela and Italo sat beside each other on the porch steps. Lois ran across the grass, chasing her friends, barefoot and laughing, the kind of sound that once seemed impossible. The sky was soft gold, the light catching in the curls of her ponytail, her hands waving like wings. Angela leaned against his shoulder, tired but content. I still think about what could have happened, she murmured. I try not to, he said. But sometimes, yeah. Angela nodded. It's strange, knowing how close you came to being a headline. You saved me, she whispered. He turned, voice low. No. She didn't save me, he said, eyes following Lois's every step. She reminded me I was worth saving. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.